So far, we've been doing the shoot and this 50mm seems to be doing well. I saw some back focus images. For example, one eye that's away from the camera was in focus, while I could have swore the eye that was closest to the camera was in focus. So I can probably see some, I want to say some primitive technology, of course, because this is an older lens, but primitive technology is kind of hindering this old 50mm EF 1.2 lens. This is the version 1, by the way. I'm not sure if they made a version 2. I'm pretty sure they did, but it doesn't say version 2, it just says version 1. This is a USML lens, by the way. And so the technology is an ultrasonic motor technology, in which it's probably going to be a little less than the nano USM or whatever they call that new ultrasonic motor that they put in the new lenses. So there's that. But as far as the speed of this lens, it's pretty freaking fast. Like, I don't see any issues with the glass being so big at 1.2. I don't see any of those issues from image to image to image. It hasn't even back focused. Like, as far as taking portraits, you can get as close as you need to with this lens pretty much. I haven't had any issues with how close I'm getting to the subject and it not being able to focus. It hasn't like focus hunted. It hasn't went through its paces trying to find focus. It hasn't failed to find focus. It might just be a little bit back focused. But as far as this lens in the grand scheme of things, it's a great lens. I have not seen any issues focusing with it, utilizing it. It's a lightweight lens, and I just want to keep taking pictures with this. It feels good using it in the field, and the shoot's coming out great as far as I can tell. The only thing that I think is an issue is going to be that back focusing from the eye that's not the closest in focus versus the eye that's closest, that's supposed to be in focus. Camera lens was made at a time where eye tracking autofocus and AI servo wasn't as intense on the camera bodies. So, you know, as far as the communication being 100%, the technology in the cameras couldn't even do that. And if you're shooting at like what, 2.8, it won't be as big of an issue if you back focus on one eye, but it is still an issue. So those of you who are portrait fanatics and want to make sure the closest eye is in focus and stuff like that, then you might have an issue with this lens. But other than that, at 1.2, you really can't argue with this lens from what I can see from the back of the camera. Here comes the model. But guys, check this out. I just noticed this. Look at this. This is the RF lens and it's like this big. Whereas this is the EF lens with the actual converter, the EF RF converter. And look, the RF lens is still bigger. Of course, it has this extra ring on there for the RF, the little new ring that they put on here that I never use. But I gotta have extra length and probably extra weight on here to carry around, and it's gonna take up more space. This much more space means a lot in your camera bag, especially when it comes to figuring out whether or not you're gonna use a lens. These two things are a big deal. And if you had a regular DSLR, this EF, this extra amount of space wouldn't even be a factor here where this converter is. So look, if you're talking about space savings, the EF lens is where to go. All right guys, so we're gonna take this lens off. Let me put the sensor down here. And we're gonna put on our RF 50mm 1.2.
Post-production Devin here again, and let's just go through the sections of the shoot where I could actually see chromatic aberration. It did happen on the RF lens, but very, very, very like controlled and in a very unique situation, but I'll go through that in just a second. Here I could find chromatic aberration right here, especially with this being so close to the lens right here at the fence. You remember that fence I was telling you guys about in the last episode? This is the same fence, but wow, chromatic aberration. This is the EF lens, the EF 50mm. You can see it up in the left-hand corner here. It tells you what lens I'm using. And then let's go down here to the next image here. Yep, this is I don't really see chromatic aberration as much on this yeah, a little bit. I can see a little bit of chromatic aberration here on this image, but not as much. Let's see here. This one I saw up here in the corner here. See, chromatic aberration, chromatic aberration, chromatic aberration. Oh, jeez. But yep. This one, it was definitely like on the earring and the side of the face here, as we just saw earlier. earrings. Like, I want to say this is just a specular highlight. It's a very, very minuscule part of the image, but it makes all the difference. When you really want to be a good photographer and you really want to capture these details, when you see, the things that are in focus versus not in focus, and then you see small specular highlights that reflect jewelry that they bought, it makes all the difference in the world. Even though it's small, it defeats the purpose of them even wearing it if you got, I want to say, a good percent of it. A good percentage of it is just chromatic aberration. So there's that. Let me see here. I don't really remember anything evident here. Yeah, you can see chromatic aberration going across the hood, just in some places closer to the plane of focus. Same thing with the locks on the fence here. It's just, oh geez, it was definitely on this belt here, chromatic aberration colony right here. It's just all over the belt, contrasting edges, and how this appears in your real, in a real life situation. You won't really notice it, but you'll have a general feel on this. See here, chromatic aberration, high contrasting situation, bright backdrop, dark foreground, chromatic aberration on the plane of focus, right there on a leg, chromatic aberration here, 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 here. And I don't have lens corrections on because I don't feel like correcting all this stuff. But let me just put on lens corrections real quick. Enable lens corrections. Go to Canon. And it says 50mm 1.4. That is not the lens that I'm using. And did it correct any other? Nope. It did not correct chromatic aberrations. Let's go to manual correct. Let me go amount. Let's put some of that green in here. I'm gonna just jack it all the way up just to see what it's gonna do. And it still didn't pull out a fair bit of it. Like, it's chromatic aberration right here. Sheesh. Oh jeez. Let's check that earring. This earring is not that bad. I don't see any chromatic aberration there. But as you can see, guys, it's just a mess dealing with this chromatic aberration, and I just aberrations. Oh jeez. Chromatic aberration is, oh my goodness. Let me cut Lightroom on. And see, and here's the thing that Lightroom does. Even though Lightroom, and I didn't really even touch this part of the image in post-production, but look at what Lightroom does to try to correct for this. You see, it just kind of neutralizes the color, which in the grand scheme of things you wouldn't be able to tell. But you see this ghosty effect that happens. This is like a shutter speed that was not chosen correctly. You understand what I'm saying? Like, if you were taking a picture in a sports situation, you would never want something like this to fly, because you want to nail as much as possible, get, freeze that subject as much as possible, and it did not happen here. And even on this chromatic aberration, it seems to be combining with this chromatic aberration and making this weird flary type pattern. I have no idea, but this is, look at that. It's all green. It's almost like it's adding like a layer of corrosion to the pipe here, and it's all the way down this thing. It's crazy how much chromatic aberration is in this lens. And yeah, you might be saying at 100, or when you feel the image, it doesn't make a difference. But if somebody was using this for like a makeup ad or some billboard or some big print, who knows? A lot of people think that things that were fashionable back in the day are going to come back in fashion, and it always happens. So wouldn't prints come back in fashion now that everybody has everything online? And I wouldn't. Anyway, you should treat your pictures as if they're timeless if you're a professional photographer. So no chromatic aberration. Oh jeez. Let's go back. I can see it. Dead. Woo. And that's why I made this one black and white, because at least I don't get no chromatic aberration out of this one. Now let's go to the 50mm 1.2 RF lens. I think there was one. Let's see here. And this is the RF lens. And this is the chromatic aberration that I'm seeing on the RF lens. That's all the chromatic aberration that I can find with this RFL lens. And see how minimal it is. Now look at these trees. You don't really see any, if any, chromatic aberration on these trees, on these tree limbs, on these leaves. That's usually where a big culprit of chromatic aberration is coming from. The only reason I think we can see chromatic aberration on this dress is because of the design, the sequin, and stuff like that. So, yeah, but I didn't see little to any chromatic aberration on. It's very extremely minimal. And you gotta give it out to Canon. There's a little bit of chromatic aberration right here where you see the greens bleeding, but you gotta give it up to Canon, guys, for doing what they did with this RFL lens. It's one of the best on the planet. Also, guys, when you're training your eyes and you want to be a better photographer, one of the biggest things you will notice is focus and chromatic aberration and distortion when you really start to take pictures of these things that require you to look at them. You know, high contrast situations, pearls and necklaces and jewels, all these things that require you to be able to be on cue and make sure it looks good. Because if somebody were to print it, put it in a publication, billboard, anything like that, and you can see it, you can't ever unsee it. And prints tend to become permanent depending on who you allow and license to print your work. So when you look back at it, it's always going to give you a cringy feeling if you can find something that you could have fixed before and you didn't fix it. And, you know, well, as me as a photographer, I tend to have a little bit of not, I wouldn't say regret, but it kind of bothers me a little bit that my eyes are advanced now and they weren't as advanced before. It's one of those things as a photographer that you learn to, I guess, love about yourself, that you're growing and stuff like that. But chromatic aberration is one of those things that, even though it's not even your fault, knowing, you know, either to correct it or having to deal with it being corrected is all stress for me. And it should be for any other professional.
But it feels lighter. Like I can just go around and shoot with it all day, but for whatever reason, the weight seems to be right here on the camera more so than on the lens. So maybe that's a weight difference. I haven't put the weight calculations out. Maybe I'll have that on the screen for you, but it definitely feels like a different lens. And so let's get started. All right, guys, so another benefit of shooting with a 50mm lens, you get to get into tighter spaces than an 85 or 105, 1.4, like my favorite lens. And you can get the focus a lot closer to your subject. Now, with that being said, the 50mm lens is not something you want to get off. Okay, bird. With that said, the 50mm lens is not a lens that you want to really get close to your subject because of the distortion that you might cause, because it's such a wide angle lens and the subject tends to wrap around the lens, barrel distort the actual subject, maybe even pincushion distort, depending on where you photograph them in the actual photograph. But you can get in tighter spaces with this lens. Stay right there. Huh.
As I said before, the 50mm RFL lens is one of the best lenses, if not the best 50mm lens that I've ever used in my life. The combination of the R5 and all this new mirrorless technology, eye tracking autofocus, face tracking autofocus, dual pixel autofocus, all this stuff that Canon's put in, it has paid off to some of the best optics that you could ever find on the market with these RFL lenses specifically, because these other RF lenses are something else. But anyway, but like I said before, this lens feels plasticky and hollow. It feels like if I drop this with all these heavy optics on the inside of it, that the optics are going to find their way to crack the outside surface of this lens when I drop it. I feel like that's going to happen. Optics are all the way pushed back because of the new sensor design, right? The sensor is closer to the lens, but with all these heavy optics for the 1.2 aperture, it makes it feel like if I drop it, those optics are right there on the edge of the edge of that plastic, and something bad is going to happen. Either the optics are going to crack on the inside, the elements are going to be messed up, or I got to take this immediately to Canon. And I don't even know if most mom and pop shops or smaller photography companies, there's not a lot going around today, but I don't even know if they can fix something like this. This is a marvel of technology with this new RF control ring and a lot more circuitry on the inside. It, you know, for small fixes, I'm not even sure if the smaller photography companies can even handle something like an RFL lens. If you know of smaller photography companies that can, let me know in the comments below, because I feel like if I drop any of these lenses, that it's just over for these lenses. Whereas the Canon 50mm 1.2 EF-L lens, that lens made like it was made like made to be a tool. Like it could be dropped. It feels like it could be dropped fine. And it feels like it feels sturdy. It's hard to explain, but I feel like I can go anywhere with the 50 millimeter 1.2 and the EF version, and I can use this for years. Here's another thing that most people don't realize about mirrorless cameras. Mirrorless cameras give you the big advantage of being able to see your exposure before you take the picture. So in real time, you're getting a readout of your aperture, ISO, and your shutter speed and how they interact with each other, the exposure triangle. But when you go to focus on an image and you don't have enough light, it becomes a problem. Now, say for example, you're looking into a mirrorless camera and you go to focus on an image and you can't see anything. Well, therein lies two problems. Now, mirrorless cameras have the option of turning off exposure display, or live exposure display, depending on what camera you have. But basically, the option that allows you to see your exposure in real time and how it affects your image, you can cut that off and just have a plain display. But at the end of the day, you got two digital displays that are getting a live readout of what's going on around it or what's coming through the lens specifically. And you have to make sure that your camera can still focus despite what you can see on the screen. Your screen might be giving you a real-time readout of what it sees or displaying it just to display it and not giving you a real-time exposure. But the issue comes into play is that when you don't have a lens that has enough light coming through, it won't even focus at all, because you might be seeing it on the display even if you don't have the live display option going, but your camera is not getting enough light through it to actually see what's in front of it. Your camera might just be making a screen for you to see. Having a 1.2 lens defeats a lot of those issues. So that's one of the biggest, benefits to having a wide aperture lens, so wide at 1.2, because you're letting in so much more than the average amount of light that an average lens would let in. Almost forgot the charts, guys. We got the 50 millimeter EF-L lens, the EF version for DSLRs. This one we're looking at right now at 1.2. It's not looking good in the middle. That's at 300%, but let's go out to 100%. And even there, it looks like it has a green haze. This green haze is not working well for the lens at all. I can't really even tell the sharpness because the green haze is so distracting. And yes, this is that chromatic aberration that I was talking about. It's so much chromatic aberration that it really affects the sharpness of the lens. I think this is probably some of the most chromatic aberrations I have ever seen on a lens, next to the Canon 50 millimeter 1.4 USM lens. So the little brother of this lens that was made around the same time, it still had a lot of chromatic aberration, probably more than this one. So it's kind of suffering from the same thing, but this one is at 1.2. And you'd think that, if you buy a 1.2 lens, you want to use it 1.2, right? So this is what you're going to be dealing with. Let's go to the corners. And yeah, it's just even looking worse. Like I would not want anything to be resolved here at these corners right here. Let's stop it down to 1.4 on the EF 50 millimeter, and this looks more like what I would want to see. If this looks sharp, it looks clean, it looks free of optical issues for most people. If I were using this lens, let's go back to 1.2 and let's compare these two. All right. So if I'm comparing this 1.2 on my left to the 1.4 on my right, literally we just stopped it down a third of a stop, and it looks mind-numbingly different. Like this is almost like new camera sensor different. Like if I were to buy this 50 millimeter 1.2 back then, and I would think that I'm getting the best image quality that Canon has to provide, I'm putting in my camera. This is holding your camera back. Even cameras that were like 20 megapixels back then revealed, this chromatic aberration here. Excuse me, the chromatic aberration is such a complicated word. Anyway, here in the middle. So let's go out to the corner on both. This is at 1.4, remember, and it's like night and day difference. This is a 1.4 lens. This is not a 1.2 lens. I highly doubt anybody would really want to use this at 1.2. I mean, besides the lack of sharpness, we got a lot a lot of chromatic aberration, and that's really contributing to a lack of contrast and a lack of, it's just not there. So yeah, we will use this at 1.4. Now let's compare this lens to the, let me take it off comparison mode. Let's look at the 50mm RF. And see, this is the 50mm RF lens, right? We go in. It looks world class. Let's go to 300%. It's great. It's great. And it's sharp. It's like you can't really get a 1.2 lens. Look at that. Much sharper than this at 1.2. Just rip the aperture blades off because wow. This is, now let's compare this 1.2 to the EF 1.2. And EF is on my right, the RF is on my left. And just even at this crop, at this full crop here, look at the lenses. So let's look at the pictures. When you come into Lightroom as a professional, which one would you rather have? Would you rather have this one on the left or this one on the right? This one on the left, hands down. And this is how you usually are going to see your pictures. Maybe behind the camera you won't see it as much, but in Lightroom and Photoshop, when you get it on your camera or on your computer, excuse me, and you look at the entire image, this is what you see. And you can immediately see a pop in color. And I haven't done anything to the colors on this one. Now I did even out the exposures, but even at even exposures, look at the colors. The colors are so much richer here. They're so much richer here on the 1.2 RF lens. And this is what you're paying for. Paying a little bit too much, but this is what you're paying for. And at 1.2, let's zoom in all the way. I'm gonna zoom in on the RF side. That's 300. Let's bring it back to 100%. Wow, it's a night and day difference. If your optometrist gave you glasses, which ones would you want? That's, I mean, but here's the thing. The human eyes are very, let's look at the corners, are very advanced, and they can pick up on these things. You might not know exactly how to explain it as a customer or a person who is actually looking at the image, an audience member, but you can tell what's good and what's not. And if I paid $3,000 for a camera, $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 for a camera, and then put this on it, on the right here at 1.2, I wouldn't be happy with the results that I got from that camera. I would not, especially when you got cell phones chomping at the bit with all this AI and computational photography. So let's switch it here. What do we have here? We have the RF 1.2 at 1.2, and we have stopped down the EF. So we went from 1.2 on the EF. Why does she keep switching? To 1.4 on the EF, and now these are starting to look very, very similar. These are looking, so the EF, I know it switched, I'm sorry about that, but the EF version is on the left and the RF version is on the right. And wow, I mean, that cleaned up really quickly, but still a stunning show from the let me see if I can but stunning show here from the now I know the white balance is a little bit different here, but bear with me. Stunning show from the RF. RF is still beaming at 1.2 while this has been stopped down to 1.4. So all in all, guys, what do you think? What are your thoughts? Leave your thoughts in the comment section below and stay tuned for the next video.